top 10 non-metal albums of the year, really?
Pink
Non-metal?
panty-wearing poser.
Reductionist
Real
of
metalheads
you.
listen
You're
only
not
to real
seriously
metal,
grouping
specifically
everything
the
that
stuff
isn't
that
metal
I deem
into
as
one
real metal.
genre
No
and
auto-tune
implying they're all
allowed,
the
unless
same,
it's Ozzy
are you?
Osbourne, of
See, this
course.
is just
I don't listen to that
extremely
fake,
silly. All these
woke,
genre
teeny
labels
bopper
are
pop and rap
ridiculous,
and
but
crap
also,
garbage, 'cause it all
please learn
sounds
the
the
difference
same.
between
I only
post-acid
listen to
jazz
real
rap
metal,
and
and I will
neo-folk
do whatever
art
it
punk
takes
if
to
you're going to
protect
talk about
real
them in
metal.
any capacity.
No
They're
compromises,
very real, and I
no
definitely
bullshit,
didn't make up
only
these
the most
genre labels
extreme
while
of the
also
most
complaining about
extreme.
genre labels.
I think you should be
Grouping
hunted
everything
for
together
sport
as
if you don't listen to
non-metal
real
really just
true
shows how
metal.
close-minded your
Specifically
view
the
of
stuff
music
that I
outside of
deem as
metal
real true
really
metal.
is.
Why are
Like,
you
if
talking
you're gonna
about
do a
the
top
best
10,
new
why not just call it like
nationalist
the top
socialist
10
black
albums
metal?
of the year?
Why are
Like,
you
how
talking about
hard
the
is
best
that?
new
Like, even though you're a
underground
metal channel and you
porno-grind
make
slam
content
metal?
specifically
That's
for
real
metalheads,
stuff.
I think
That's
people would
real
understand
hard
that, alright?
underground
Unless
shit.
you're implying
Not
that
this
they're as stupid
fucking
as you.
shit.
Hi everyone, Winethany Drunk Tano here with the top 10 best non-metal albums of 2023. Every single year I hear from metal elitists and gatekeepers and music snobs who take themselves far too fucking seriously about how the existence of a top 10 best non-metal albums video is really terrifying and scary and horrible and stupid. Because, I don't know, I guess trying to introduce music to metalheads that isn't metal is like a crime or something, I guess. Newsflash, it's 2023. Stop crying about genre labels and whether or not someone's true or whether or not someone's a poser, because it literally doesn't fucking matter. I just want to talk about cool music, and I'm gonna do that with or without your goddamn permission. Hey, speaking of which, welcome to the Metal Meltdown's top 10 best non-metal albums of 2023, because even though we focus primarily on metal here on the Metal Meltdown, I personally enjoy music from a wide variety of subgenres and sounds and styles. Aside from the fact that we are not talking about metal music, this top 10 will function similarly to every other top 10 video that I do. We will be talking about each album in order of release. This is not a ranked or numbered list. I will simply tell you what my number one album of the year is once we arrive to it. But first up, we have a few honorable mentions, albums that I thoroughly enjoyed, but unfortunately just didn't make the final cut, but I still want to tell you about because they're still really cool and fun and interesting. The first honorable mention is Little Songs from Coulter Wall, released July 14th via La Honda Records and RCA. I don't really listen to a lot of country music in general, but when I do listen to country music, when I am kind of in that mood for country music, this is the kind of country music that I want to listen to. I love the really simplistic, homey, rustic sound here. I mean, this really does kind of feel in a lot of ways like a really old school country record that could have been dropped in the 50s or 60s. Like, this kind of feels like something I would hear at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville way back in the day. This sounds like something that, like, my grandfather would listen to back in the day. There's a lot of great storytelling and emotive lyricism on the album. I like how naked it is. I like how gritty it is. I like how charming it is. Coulter himself, too, sporting some of the best country vocals I think I've heard in some time. I love how deep and bassy his voice is while still having that kind of classic country yarl. Not a groundbreaking record by any stretch, but a thoroughly entertaining one and probably one of the more authentic country records I've heard in a long time. Next up, we have Barbie, the album, the official soundtrack from the film of the same name, released July 21st via Atlantic Records. I'm just gonna get this out of the way. By no means the most consistent or cohesive album we'll be talking about today. There are a few duds, there are a few underwhelming cuts, but the stuff that hits so fucking hard. It's sassy, it's sexy, it's bright, it's bubbly, it's fun, it's filled with addictive grooves and satisfying licks and hooks. There's a pretty good amount of variety to the record as well, like you'll have some 80s synth pop and synth rock in the form of Man I Am from Sam Smith, then you'll have some like kind of spastic, erratic, almost hyper pop from Charlie XCX on Speed Drive. Some short, breezy, psychedelic pop from Tame Impala on Journey to the Real World. Some full-on, like, classic disco flavor from Dua Lipa on Dance the Night. You get a stirring, spacious, thought-provoking tearjerker of a ballad from Billie Eilish in the form of What Was I Made For, and internet Sigma male icon Ryan Gosling even pops up for some goofy goodness with the iconic I'm Just Ken and the hilarious Push, originally by Matchbox 20. And last but not least, we have Chronicles of a Diamond from Black Pumas, released October 27th via ATO. I just love the feel and the vibe of this thing, man. Like, it's 1960s, 70s, like, soul music and funk music with, like, shades of jazz and classic rock and garage rock and psychedelic rock. It's got heart, it's got soul, it's smooth, it's sexy, it's slick. It's like a smorgasbord of, like, the coolest sounds and ideas from, like, 1960s, early 70s pop and rock and R&B music, you know? Like, this feels like something that, like, Stevie Wonder could have put back together back in the day. Like, this feels like it could have been on Motown Records, you know? And it's able to sound like that without feeling like a total throwback, without feeling like it's nostalgia bait, like it's just trying to pander. Like, it feels really genuine and sincere and fresh. Alright, now we move on to the actual top 10, starting with IX, or if you prefer, 9, from Host, released February 24th via Nuclear Blast Records. This is the debut album from this new side project featuring Nick Holmes and Greg McIntosh of Paradise Lost fame. And through 9, Host are exploring a universe of ideas previously tapped upon and revealed to us by Paradise Lost on their somewhat controversial, but I would argue underrated album, Host, which went into more like new wave, gothic rock, dark wave, synth pop kind of territory, and as such, so does 9. And I honestly kind of love it, man. I mean, it's cold, it's creepy, it's mournful and somber. The way that different vocal layers and synthesizers and like drum loops are kind of arranged and layered and kind of thrown out there. I'm reminded of classic stuff from like Depeche Mode, the Eurythmics, Psychosonic. It's moody and powerful to the point of being almost immersive too. Like, I don't just want to like dance and also simultaneously weep to a lot of this material. I listen to this and I feel like I'm in like an old like goth pop alt kind of like underground club in like the 80s or 90s or something like that. Next up, we have Red Moon in Venus from Kali Uchis, released March 3rd via Geffen Records. Dude, I'm just gonna say it. This sounds hot. This sounds sexy. This sounds like genuinely really fucking romantic and has really smooth, slick, sexual vibes. Uchis herself has described the album as a timeless, burning expression of desire, heartbreak, faith, and honestly, reflecting the divine femininity of the moon and Venus. And yeah, that tracks, honest to fucking God. Very smooth, sensual R&B and neo-soul with like Latin, Colombian music influences and some psychedelic touches and spices and garnishes and flourishes, making for an album that is very lush and intimate and passionate. Without getting into any weird details, I will tell you, this album, a lovely lady, or man, or person, whatever works for you, and a bottle of red wine, great combination. Excellent combination. Straight up. I'm telling you right now, buddy, trust me on this. Next up, we have Scaring the Hose, a collaborative LP from Danny Brown and JPEG Mafia, released March 24th via AWOL and Peggy. When I first heard that Danny Brown and JPEG Mafia, two acts responsible for some of the most dark, thought-provoking, experimental hip-hop of the past few years, were joining forces, I expected, well, dark, thought-provoking, experimental hip-hop of epic proportions. But I didn't get that. I ended up kind of getting the polar fucking opposite of what I expected. Fun, loose, playful, creative, slightly erratic, like alternative hip-hop with 90s and 2000s dance samples and like horns and brass and this really raw kind of like musty mixing and production. Lyrics with a great sense of humor pulling from like meme and internet culture and modern politics and pop culture. Big, hard, fat, nasty beats, all kind of weird switches and progressions and changes. This is the most fun-filled, entertaining album of the year. In hip-hop, whatever, like in any genre. Number one non-metal album of the year, period. Probably one of the best albums of the year in any genre whatsoever. It goes hella fucking hard. Check it out if you have not already. Next up, we have In Times New Roman from Queens of the Stone Age, released June 16th via Matador Records. I think a lot of you might already know who Queens of the Stone Age are. They're a pretty big name band at this point. What I like about this album specifically is that it feels like a return to the earliest days of Queens of the Stone Age. Records like Rated R, Songs for the Deaf, and even the self-titled debut, back when they were more of a straightforward kind of stoner rock band. It's scuzzy and there's a decent amount of feedback and static and some nice harmonies and vocal textures. Some bumpin' garage rock-esque rhythms and tempos, some heavier sections contrasted with some great hooks. Some cool twists and turns here and there without going into the more progressive territory of Like Clockwork or the more glitzy, glammy territory of Villains. It's Queens of the Stone Age doing what they do best, just writing and performing really great garage, alternative, stoner rock. What more could you really want? Next up, we have 3D Country from Geese, released June 23rd via Partisan Records. This is probably one of the most erratic and creative rock albums I've heard in some time. There's influences from alternative country, from indie rock, from classic rock, from post-punk. There are weird bursts of like almost bombastic extreme metal, weird bursts of like static and noise with harsh screeching vocals. There's hooks and jingles and melodies that wouldn't be out of place on like a classic rock album from the Rolling Stones, or maybe something more modern from like the Glorious Sons or Monster Truck. So many almost random vocal inflections and like tone switches and shit. And all the while, it is consistently so fun. Like, I am jamming to so many of these fucking songs. I love the vibe. Some of the best vocals I've heard on any kind of rock album this year, honestly. Anthony Fantano's description of this album is one of my favorites, though, where he said it's dad rock for people who don't have dads. That's perfect. That's awesome. That's so good. Next up, we have I Was Mature for My Age, But I Was Still a Child from Group Therapy, released June 27th, independently. This is the debut album from this hip-hop, R&B, modern pop collective. They're a relatively new group, having only released a few other EPs and mixtapes as well. Despite that, they've left a huge impression on me. This is something that, much like 3D Country and Scaring the Hose, I've listened to on a pretty regular basis throughout the year. This is also probably one of the most relatable albums that we're talking about today because it deals with financial struggles and identity politics and issues and struggles and disillusionment and self-empowerment in a way that feels really urgent and poignant and without ever being like a total full-on bummer as well. There's a lot of flavor and character and versatility and personality to the album. Like, I feel like I'm really getting to know Group Therapy on this album. Like, they kind of lay themselves bare on this thing. Definitely one of the most underrated kind of hip-hop R&B albums I've heard this year. Like, I think it's extremely well done. Next up, we have Love in a Vicious Way from Mother Tongues, released July 21st via Wavy Haze Records. This is the debut album from this Toronto pop rock psych synth duo. Shout out to some Toronto peeps. How are ya? What's up? I am totally in love with how this album blends like 90s synth pop and like dreamwave and alternative rock and psychedelic music into something very fluid and serene and precious and also feral and unpredictable. Like, there are so many like cascading waves of synthesizers and like dreamy vocal harmonies and textures, and these like electronic patches and these more guitar-driven kind of riff-heavy sections. It makes for something really trancy and hypnotic and alluring. I find myself feeling about this album the same way Anna felt about Stone from Baroness, where I just want to like chill and vibe and get really fucking high with this thing. Next up, we have Unreal Unearth from Hozier, released August 18th via Rubyworks Island and Columbia. This is the third full-length studio album from Irish singer-songwriter Hozier, who I already knew about to some extent. I'm familiar with stuff like Take Me to Church and Blood Upon the Snow. but I've never really been, like, really aware of what he's done, and that's kind of changed with Unreal Unearth. I was drawn in initially by the concept of this record, which is inspired by Dante's Inferno and the idea of, like, 9 circles of hell. The album is also pretty eclectic, playing around with influences from funk rock, alternative rock, folk music, playing around with these massive, heart-wrenching melodies and harmonies, with lyrics occasionally written and sung in, like, traditional Irish language. And what anchors everything Hozier is doing across this album is his absolutely incredible fucking voice. Like, everything else, as good as it is nothing more than icing. Hozier's voice is the delicious cake that gives this thing body and flavor and meaning. I will say this thing is a little bit long for my liking, but it remains a really cinematic and enthralling endeavor from start to finish, despite that. Like, I'm glued to this thing every time I listen to it. It is extremely well done. Next up, we buy Diabetic Test Strips from Armand Hammer, released September 29th via Fat Possum. Don't get me wrong, folks, I really like a lot of the stuff that Billy Woods and Elusive have done separately, but I think that both of them are at their best when they're collaborating within Armand Hammer. They just complement each other so well, and they work so well together, and I think that We Buy Diabetic Test Strips is testament to the strength of their union and the talent and the power of Armand Hammer as a group. It is very, like, conscious, thought-provoking, experimental hip-hop that feels kind of surreal, but it also has this very, like, down-to-earth presence and vibe. The collaborations on here are interesting, not just because they provide their own, like, unique ideas and flavors. I mean, you've got LP from Run the Jewels, you've got Soul Glow, Pink Seafood, Jungle Pussy, the aforementioned JPEG Mafia popping up as well. But this also, in a way, creates a kind of community within context of the album. Like, we have these really vivid snapshots of, like, societal dysfunction, and there's a lot of, like, self-reflection and inward thinking on this. And it's because so many people are being so honest on this record and kind of pooling all of their talents and resources onto something that means something. And finally, we have Sanguivore from Creeper, released October 13th via Spine Farm Records. I really like Creeper. I came to know them through 2020's Sex, Death, and the Infinite Void, which was also one of my favorite non-metal albums of that year. I loved how it combined glam rock and shock rock and, like, classic rock and roll into something that was theatrical and lavish and over the top and really fun. With Sanguivore, we're switching things up big time. It's a concept album inspired by the supernatural, by gothic creatures, by vampires, and by disease, and specifically the end of COVID-19 lockdowns and quarantine measures. It is an album that kind of, as a result, relishes in, like, death, but has a lot of, like, enthusiasm and life and beauty within it. And musically, it kind of actually abandons a lot of those influences from Sex, Death, and the Infinite Void, and instead kind of goes for, like, a weird mix of, like, over-the-top kind of rock opera kind of stuff with, like, horror punk and pop punk. It's like Danzig, Meatloaf, and My Chemical Romance kind of all, like, rolled into a ball and deep-fried and slathered with, like, white truffle sauce. And it's really excessive and really goofy, but honestly, I kinda love it. And voila! Those are the top 10 best non-metal albums of 2023. Now it's time for you to tell me, what are some albums from across the realms of hip-hop, jazz, pop, country, techno, punk or alternative or indie rock that you enjoyed in 2023? Let me know, please and thank you. Also, last minute announcement, the Metal Meltdown is going to be streaming again on Monday, December 18th. We're going to finally be doing our 15K subscriber celebration stream. I know it's a Monday, but this is literally the only day that I'm able to do it because it's the goddamn holidays and I'm goddamn busy. I will, by popular demand, be dressed up as a hot dog, and we're just gonna drink and hang out, and I'll answer your questions. We're not even gonna play video games. We're literally just gonna hang out and shoot the shit and celebrate success and fun and whatever else. You can find a link to that stream and details all about it in the link to the description below. Press this button to subscribe. Look, there's even more videos here, and as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.